My name is Victoria Sterling. I'm 28 years old, a forensic accountant living in a penthouse overlooking Manhattan skyline. Last month, I inherited $12 million from my grandmother's estate, money that was supposed to change everything. But tomorrow, I'll be sitting across from my stepmother and half-brother at the family law firm, and they have no idea I've discovered what they've been planning all along. The inheritance came with a catch, as most things in the Sterling family do. My grandmother, Eleanor Sterling, had been the matriarch of a pharmaceutical empire worth over $200 million. Her will was specific. I would receive $12 million outright, but the rest of the fortune would be held in trust until I turned 30. My stepmother, Patricia, would serve as the trustee, and my half-brother Marcus would receive his portion immediately, $15 million, free and clear. I remember the day we sat in the lawyer's office, the mahogany walls seeming to close in around us. Patricia's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the leather armrest of her chair, her smile as cold as winter rain. Marcus lounged beside her, already mentally spending his windfall. They both looked at me with something that wasn't quite pity, but close enough to make my skin crawl. "Don't worry, Victoria," Patricia had said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. 2 years will pass quickly, and then you'll have access to everything. I'll take very good care of your inheritance in the meantime. I should have seen it then. The way her eyes glittered, the way Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. But grief makes you blind to a lot of things, and I was drowning in the loss of the only person who had ever truly understood me. Patricia Sterling had married my father when I was 15, 3 years after my mother died in a car accident. She came into our lives like a perfectly orchestrated symphony, beautiful, charming, and devastatingly effective at making my father believe she was exactly what our broken family needed. My father, David Sterling, had been a shell of himself after my mother's death. He threw himself into work, leaving me to navigate high school and heartbreak alone. When Patricia appeared, an elegant widow with her own tragic story and a teenage son who needed a father figure, it seemed like destiny. She was everything my mother hadn't been. Where my mother was warm and spontaneous, Patricia was cool and calculated. Where my mother wore her heart on her sleeve, Patricia kept her emotions locked behind designer clothes and perfect makeup. My father ate it up, desperate for stability after years of chaos. Marcus was 2 years older than me, and from the moment they moved into our Westchester estate, he made it clear that he saw me as an obstacle to overcome rather than a sister to cherish. He was handsome in that effortless way that comes with good genetics and better money, but there was something hollow behind his green eyes, something that made me instinctively keep my distance. The three of them formed a unit, and I was the outsider looking in. Family dinners became elaborate performances where Patricia would ask about my day with a kind of interest that felt rehearsed, and Marcus would make jokes that cut just deep enough to draw blood without leaving visible wounds. My father, desperate to make his new family work, chose not to see the dynamics playing out right in front of him. Or maybe he did see, and he chose Patricia's happiness over mine. Either way, by the time I graduated high school, I felt like a stranger in my own home. The first real warning came 6 months after the will reading. I was organizing my grandmother's personal effects, a task that Patricia had been too emotional to handle herself. In a shoebox hidden behind winter coats in my grandmother's closet, I found a collection of letters and photographs that made my blood run cold. The letters were correspondence between my grandmother and a private investigator named Thomas Chin. They dated back 3 years, starting just after Patricia had married my father. My grandmother had suspected something about Patricia's first marriage, about the circumstances surrounding her first husband's death. According to the investigators' reports, Patricia's first husband, Jonathan Morrison, had died of what appeared to be a heart attack at the age of 45. He had been healthy, active, with no family history of heart disease. More importantly, he had recently changed his will to leave everything to Patricia, cutting out his children from his first marriage. The similarities were too striking to ignore. My grandmother had been healthy too, active well into her 80s. Her sudden decline and death from what doctors called natural causes had seemed abrupt, but not impossible. Until I read those letters. In her final letter to the investigator, dated just 2 weeks before her death, my grandmother had written, "I fear I may have been too trusting. Patricia has been bringing me tea every afternoon, insisting on preparing it herself. I've been feeling increasingly weak, confused. If something happens to me, please give these documents to Victoria. She needs to know the truth." My hands shook as I read those words. My grandmother had suspected Patricia was poisoning her, and she had died before she could prove it. That evening, I sat in my apartment staring at those letters until the words blurred together. I thought about my grandmother's final months, how Patricia had suddenly become so attentive, so caring. She had moved into the estate to help take care of Eleanor, preparing special meals and bringing her afternoon tea from a blend she claimed was imported from England. My grandmother had mentioned feeling tired, more confused than usual. We all attributed it to age, to the natural decline that comes with being in your 80s. But what if it wasn't natural at all? I called Thomas Chin the next morning. He was a compact man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. We met at a small cafe in Chinatown, surrounded by the comfortable anonymity of strangers. "Your grandmother was convinced Patricia was slowly poisoning her," he said without preamble, sliding a thick manila envelope across the table. "She hired me to investigate Patricia's background, and what we found was concerning." The envelope contained everything: Patricia's real background, her first husband's medical records, and a timeline that painted a picture of a woman who had made a career out of marrying wealthy older men and inheriting their fortunes. Patricia Morrison, née Patricia Hughes, had been married 3 times before she met my father. Her first husband had died in what appeared to be an accidental drowning. Her second husband had suffered a fatal heart attack. Her third husband, Jonathan Morrison, Marcus's father, had died of cardiac arrest. All 3 men had been wealthy. All 3 had changed their wills shortly before their deaths. All 3 had left everything to Patricia. The police investigated the deaths, Chen explained, but Patricia was careful. Nothing could be proven. Different jurisdictions, different methods, different timelines. But the pattern is unmistakable. I stared at the photographs of Patricia's previous husbands, all of them looking happy and healthy in family portraits taken months before their deaths. "What about my father?" I whispered. Chen's expression darkened. "Your grandmother was worried about him too. Patricia has a type, wealthy men with children who might complicate an inheritance. She eliminates the complications. She killed my grandmother to get control of the trust." "I believe so, yes. And now she has access to your inheritance for the next 2 years. Plenty of time to make it disappear, or to make you disappear." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my grandmother's final weeks, how Patricia had been so solicitous, so caring. How she had insisted on bringing tea every afternoon, how she had shooed away the housekeeper when it came to preparing my grandmother's meals. I thought about my father, how healthy he had been just 2 years ago, how he had started complaining of headaches, fatigue, minor ailments that seemed to pile up one after another. How Patricia was always there with his medication, his vitamins, his special health drinks that she prepared herself. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My father was dying, and Patricia was killing him. I drove to Westchester at dawn, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The estate looked peaceful in the morning light, but I could see the shadows lurking beneath its perfect facade. Patricia was in the kitchen when I arrived, preparing what looked like my father's morning smoothie. She looked up with that practiced smile, but I saw something flicker in her eyes when she saw my expression. "Victoria, darling, you're up early. Is everything all right?" I set the manila envelope on the counter between us, watching her face carefully. "I know what you did to my grandmother. I know what you're doing to my father." The smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Thomas Chin, the private investigator my grandmother hired. The one who documented your previous marriages, your previous husbands who all died so conveniently. I opened the envelope and spread the photographs across the counter. 3 dead husbands, Patricia. 3 inheritances. And now you're working on number 4. Her composure cracked slightly, but she recovered quickly. Your grandmother was a paranoid old woman. She saw conspiracies everywhere. She saw you poisoning her. Just like you poisoned Jonathan Morrison. Just like you're poisoning my father. Patricia's laugh was sharp, brittle. You have quite an imagination, Victoria. But you can't prove anything. If you could, don't you think the police would have been involved by now? She was right, and we both knew it. The evidence was circumstantial, compelling, but not conclusive. But I had something she didn't know about. My grandmother's final gift. 3 days before my grandmother died, she had called me to her bedside. I thought she wanted to say goodbye, to share some final wisdom or a family secret. Instead, she pressed a small key into my hand. Safety deposit box, she had whispered, her voice weak but urgent. Bank of New York, downtown branch. Box 347. If anything happens to me, Victoria, if Patricia tries to take what's yours, you'll find what you need there. I had kept the key, assuming it contained family jewelry or important documents. I had been wrong. The safety deposit box contained something much more valuable, a detailed journal documenting every symptom my grandmother had experienced over her final months, along with samples of the tea Patricia had been bringing her. My grandmother had been collecting evidence, preserving it for the day when someone would need proof of what Patricia had done. The tea samples were in small vials, carefully labeled with dates and times. My grandmother had been methodical, scientific in her approach. She had known she was dying, and she had documented her own murder. I had taken the samples to a private laboratory, the same one Chan had recommended. The results had come back yesterday. The tea contained traces of digitoxin, a cardiac glycoside that mimics the symptoms of natural heart failure. In small doses over time, it would cause weakness, confusion, and eventually cardiac arrest. The perfect murder weapon for someone patient enough to use it. Now, as I sat in my apartment the night before the meeting with Patricia and Marcus, I felt the weight of everything I had discovered pressing down on me. I had the evidence, I had the proof, but I also had something more dangerous. Knowledge that Patricia was willing to kill to protect her secrets. Tomorrow's meeting was supposed to be a routine review of the trust, a check-in on how my inheritance was being managed. Patricia had suggested it, claiming she wanted to keep me informed about the investments and decisions being made on my behalf. I had agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to finally confront her with what I knew. But tonight, sitting alone in my apartment with the evidence spread across my dining table, I realized that Patricia might see tomorrow's meeting as an opportunity to eliminate the last obstacle between her and permanent control of the sterling fortune. I thought about my father, how frail he had looked the last time I saw him, how Patricia hovered over him constantly, managing his medications, his diet, his entire life. I thought about Marcus, who had grown from a manipulative teenager into a calculating young man who saw other people as stepping stones to what he wanted. They were a team, Patricia and Marcus. They had been working together from the beginning, and now they had $12 million of my money in their control and 2 years to make it disappear. Unless I stopped them. I picked up my phone and called Chun. I need security for tomorrow's meeting, I said when he answered. And I need you to be there as a witness. You're going to confront her? I'm going to give her a choice. Confess to what she's done and make restitution, or face the consequences when I take this evidence to the police and the district attorney. Victoria, if you're right about her, if she's killed for people, she's not going to just give up. She's going to fight. I looked at the photographs of Patricia's previous husbands, at the laboratory reports showing the poison in my grandmother's tea, at the private investigator's documentation of a pattern of murder spanning 15 years. Then we'll be ready for her. I spent the rest of the evening preparing for what I knew would be the most important conversation of my life. I made copies of all the evidence, storing them in multiple locations. I wrote a detailed letter explaining everything I had discovered, with instructions to deliver it to the authorities if anything happened to me. I called my father's doctor, Dr. Mitchell, and requested copies of his medical records for the past 2 years. When I reviewed them, the pattern was unmistakable, a steady decline in health that corresponded exactly with Patricia's increased attention to his care. I also did something that felt like a betrayal but was necessary for survival. I installed a recording app on my phone and tested the audio quality. If Patricia confessed tomorrow, I wanted to have proof. As midnight approached, I stood at my window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Patricia was probably planning her own strategy for tomorrow's meeting. She had gotten away with murder 4 times, and she wouldn't hesitate to make it 5 if she felt cornered. But I had advantages she didn't know about. I had my grandmother's evidence, Chen's investigation, and most importantly, I had the element of surprise. Patricia thought she was dealing with a grieving granddaughter who was still blind to her true nature. Tomorrow, she would learn how wrong she had been. Before I went to bed, I made one last call to my father's accountant, Richard Hayes. Hayes had managed the Sterling family finances for over 20 years, and I trusted him more than anyone else in my father's professional circle. "Richard, I need you to do something for me," I said when he answered. "I need you to audit every transaction Patricia has made as trustee of my inheritance. Every investment, every expense, every movement of money. I think she's been stealing from the trust." There was a long pause. "Victoria, that's a serious accusation. What makes you think?" "I can't explain everything over the phone, but I have evidence that Patricia has been systematically murdering wealthy men and stealing their estates. My grandmother hired a private investigator before she died, and we have documentation going back 15 years. Another pause, longer this time. "My God. Victoria, if what you're saying is true, your father could be in danger." "He is in danger. Richard, I need that audit completed before tomorrow's meeting. I need to know exactly how much money Patricia has stolen so I can present the full scope of her crimes to the authorities. I'll work through the night if I have to. Victoria, be careful. If Patricia is what you think she is, she won't hesitate to protect herself." I hung up the phone and finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what I was about to do. Tomorrow, I would destroy the only family I had left. My father would learn that his wife was a serial killer. Marcus would discover that his mother had murdered his real father. And I would finally get justice for my grandmother and all of Patricia's other victims. But first, I had to survive the meeting. I set 3 alarms for the morning, double-checked that my phone was charged and the recording app was working properly. I laid out the clothes I would wear, a navy blue suit that projected confidence and authority. I wanted Patricia to see that she was no longer dealing with the grieving girl who had sat quietly in the lawyer's office a year ago. As I finally drifted off to sleep, my last thought was of my grandmother. She had known the truth about Patricia, and she had died trying to protect me from the same fate. Tomorrow, I would honor her sacrifice by making sure Patricia never hurt anyone again. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the law offices of Whitman, Hayes and Associates. In less than 10 hours, I would sit across from Patricia and Marcus Sterling and watch their world crumble around them. I was ready. The morning of the meeting arrived with gray clouds hanging low over Manhattan, as if the city itself sensed the darkness about to unfold. I dressed carefully in my navy suit, checking my appearance one final time in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked calm, composed, nothing like the terrified granddaughter who had discovered her family's deadly secrets just days ago. I slipped my phone into my jacket pocket, the recording app already activated. Whatever happened in that conference room today, I would have proof. Chen was waiting for me outside the law offices, along with a security specialist named Rodriguez who looked like he could handle anything Patricia might throw at us. "You sure you want to do this?" Chen asked as we walked toward the building. "Once you start down this path, there's no going back." I nodded, my resolve stronger than ever. My grandmother died trying to expose the truth. I won't let her sacrifice be in vain. The law offices of Whitman, Hayes and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming downtown tower. I had been here dozens of times over the years for various family business matters, but today the familiar mahogany paneling and leather furniture felt ominous, like a trap waiting to spring shut. Patricia and Marcus were already seated in the main conference room when we arrived, and I saw Patricia's eyes narrow as she noticed Chen and Rodriguez accompanying me. "Victoria, darling," Patricia said, her voice saccharine sweet, but her eyes calculating. "I wasn't expecting you to bring guests to our little meeting." She was dressed impeccably as always, in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Marcus sat beside her, scrolling through his phone with practiced boredom, but I caught him glancing at Chun with undisguised curiosity. Mr. Chun is the private investigator my grandmother hired before she died, I said, taking a seat across from them. I thought you might be interested in what he discovered. The color drained from Patricia's face so quickly I thought she might faint, but she recovered with remarkable speed. I'm not sure what kind of stories Eleanor might have told you before she passed, but you know how confused she was toward the end. She wasn't confused, I said quietly. She was being poisoned, just like your first 3 husbands, just like my father is being poisoned right now. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus looked up from his phone, his face pale. Patricia's perfectly manicured hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. That's a very serious accusation, Victoria, Patricia said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. I hope you have proof to back up such wild claims. I smiled and placed the thick manila envelope on the table between us. Actually, I do. Chen, would you like to walk them through what we found? Chen opened the envelope and began laying out photographs and documents with methodical precision. Patricia Morrison, also known as Patricia Hughes, married to 4 wealthy men over the past 20 years. 3 of them died under suspicious circumstances, all leaving their entire estates to their loving widow. He placed a photograph of Patricia's first husband on the table. Michael Hughes, age 52, died of apparent drowning in 2003. Left an estate worth $3.2 million. Another photograph. James Crawford, age 49, heart attack in 2007. Estate worth $4.8 million. Another photograph. Jonathan Morrison, age 45, cardiac arrest in 2012. Estate worth $6.1 million. Chun looked directly at Patricia. Your son Marcus's real father, who died after changing his will to leave everything to you instead of his children from his first marriage. Marcus had gone completely still, his phone forgotten in his hands. That's not true, he whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. Patricia reached for his hand, but he pulled away from her touch. Marcus, don't listen to them. They're trying to turn you against me. Tell him about the insurance policy, I said to Chin. The one worth $2 million that Patricia took out on Jonathan Morrison just 6 months before he died. Chun produced another document. Life insurance policy, dated March 15, 2012. Jonathan Morrison died on September 3, 2012. The policy paid out in full to Patricia Morrison, the sole beneficiary. This is ridiculous, Patricia said, standing up abruptly. I'm not going to sit here and listen to these lies. Marcus, we're leaving. But Marcus didn't move. He was staring at the photographs of his father, tears streaming down his cheeks. You killed him, he said, his voice broken. You kill my dad. Marcus, honey, please, Patricia pleaded, but the mask was finally slipping. I did what I had to do. For us. For our future. The confession hung in the air like poison gas. I felt my phone recording every word, documenting the moment when Patricia Sterling finally revealed her true nature. What about Eleanor? I asked, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. What did you have to do to her? Patricia's composure cracked completely. She was going to ruin everything. She hired that investigator. She was asking questions. She was going to take it all away from us. So you poison her tea, just like you poisoned Jonathan's drinks. Just like you've been poisoning my father's morning smoothies. Patricia sank back into her chair, looking older than I had ever seen her. David won't last much longer anyway. He's already so sick, so weak. It would be a mercy. The casual way she spoke about my father's murder sent ice through my veins. Where is he now? I demanded. What have you done to him? Patricia's smile was cold, triumphant. He's at home, resting. I gave him his medicine this morning before I left. A little extra dose to help him sleep through the day. I was on my feet before I realized I was moving, my hands shaking with fury. You bitch. You actually tried to kill him today, didn't you? While we were here having this meeting, you were murdering my father. Rodriguez stepped forward, his hand moving to his jacket. Ma'am, I think we need to call the police now. Already done, Chin said, holding up his own phone. I've been recording this entire conversation. The police should be here any minute. As if summoned by his words, we heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Patricia looked around wildly, like a trapped animal searching for escape. You can't prove anything, she said desperately. It's all circumstantial. Hearsay. Actually, we can prove quite a lot, I said, pulling out the laboratory report. My grandmother was smarter than you gave her credit for. She saved samples of the tea you were bringing her. The tea laced with digitoxin. The same poison that killed your previous husbands. Patricia's face went white as she read the report. That's impossible. I was so careful. You were careful for 15 years, Chin said as police officers entered the conference room. But you got greedy. You got sloppy. And you underestimated a dying woman's determination to protect her granddaughter. The police officers moved with practiced efficiency. Patricia Sterling, you're under arrest for the murder of Eleanor Sterling and the attempted murder of David Sterling. As they read her rights, Patricia looked at me with pure hatred. You have no idea what you've done, she hissed. Without me, your father will be dead within the year anyway. His heart is failing, Victoria. I was putting him out of his misery. I stared at her, this woman who had destroyed so many lives, who had poisoned my family from the inside out. No, I said quietly. You were putting yourself in control of his fortune, just like you did with all the others. The police led Patricia away in handcuffs, her designer suit a stark contrast to the cold metal restraints around her wrists. Marcus sat frozen in his chair, staring at the photographs of his father spread across the conference table. I helped her, he whispered. I knew something was wrong, but I helped her anyway. I'm an accessory to murder. Chin placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. You were a child when your father died. Whatever you did or didn't do then, you can make it right now. Help us save Victoria's father. Tell us exactly what Patricia has been giving him. Marcus looked up at me, his eyes red with tears and shame. I'm sorry, Victoria. I'm so sorry for everything. She told me you were trying to steal from the family, that we had to protect ourselves. I believed her. Where's my father? I asked urgently. What did she give him this morning? Marcus pulled out his phone with shaking hands. She said she gave him a double dose of his heart medication. Something about helping him rest while we handled the trust business. But now I realize she meant to kill him while we were here, while we had an alibi. I was running before Marcus finished speaking, Chun and Rodriguez close behind me. We had to get to Westchester, had to get to my father before Patricia's final act of murder succeeded. In the elevator, I called 911, demanding an ambulance be dispatched to the Sterling estate immediately. I called Dr. Mitchell, explaining the situation and begging him to meet us there. The drive to Westchester felt like an eternity, even with Rodriguez's security vehicle clearing traffic ahead of us. My phone rang constantly, lawyers, reporters, family friends who had somehow already heard about Patricia's arrest. I ignored them all, focused only on getting to my father in time. Chun tried to reassure me, pointing out that if Patricia had just given him the overdose that morning, there might still be time to save him. But I couldn't shake the image of my father lying unconscious in his bed, slowly dying from his wife's final betrayal. We arrived at the estate to find ambulances and police cars already in the driveway. Paramedics were rushing a stretcher out of the house, and I caught a glimpse of my father's pale face as they loaded him into the ambulance. Is he alive? I screamed, running toward the vehicle. One of the paramedics turned to me. Are you family? He's unconscious but breathing. We're taking him to Presbyterian Hospital. I rode in the ambulance, holding my father's cold hand and willing him to fight. The paramedic explained that they had found him in cardiac distress, his heart rate dangerously low. They had administered medications to stabilize him, but the next few hours would be critical. At the hospital, Dr. Mitchell was waiting for us. He took one look at my father and immediately ordered blood tests to determine exactly what Patricia had given him. The wait was excruciating. I paced the hospital corridors, Chin trying to keep me calm while Rodriguez dealt with the media circus that had erupted outside. The story was spreading like wildfire. Wealthy pharmaceutical heiress arrested for serial murder, family fortune built on blood and betrayal. But all I cared about was the man lying unconscious in the ICU, fighting for his life because his wife had tried to murder him. Dr. Mitchell finally emerged from the intensive care unit, his expression grim but hopeful. "He's stable for now," he said. The blood tests confirm massive overdoses of digitoxin and several other cardiac medications. Another hour, and we would have lost him. I collapsed into a chair, the weight of everything finally crashing down on me. Will he recover? It's too early to say. The poison has done significant damage to his heart, and he's been ingesting smaller doses for months, possibly years. His body is severely weakened. But he's fighting, Victoria. Your father is a fighter. Over the next several days, I kept vigil at my father's bedside, watching him slowly emerge from the medically induced coma the doctors had used to protect his damaged heart. When he finally opened his eyes and saw me sitting beside him, he smiled weakly. "Victoria," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I had the strangest dreams. Patricia was trying to hurt me, but that's impossible. She loves me." I took his hand, feeling how frail he had become. "Dad, I need to tell you something about Patricia. About what she's done." The conversation was the hardest thing I had ever done. Watching my father's face as I explained Patricia's crimes, seeing his heart break as he realized that the woman he loved had been slowly murdering him for years. "She killed Eleanor?" he asked, tears streaming down his cheeks. "She killed your grandmother for money?" I nodded, showing him the evidence, the laboratory reports, the investigators' findings. "She killed her previous husbands too, Dad. She's been doing this for 20 years. My father closed his eyes, processing the magnitude of Patricia's betrayal. "How could I have been so blind? How could I have chosen her over you?" "You didn't know," I said, squeezing his hand. "She was very good at hiding who she really was. But it's over now. She's in prison, and she can't hurt anyone else." The recovery was slow and painful, not just physically, but emotionally. My father had to come to terms with the fact that his wife had been systematically poisoning him while pretending to care for him. He had to accept that his stepson had been complicit in the deception, that his entire second marriage had been built on lies and murder. But gradually he began to heal. The doctors were amazed by his resilience, his determination to recover completely. Patricia's poison had weakened his heart, but it hadn't broken his spirit. We spent hours talking, really talking, for the first time in years. He apologized for choosing Patricia over me, for being blind to her manipulation. I forgave him, understanding that he had been as much a victim as anyone else. Marcus visited once, bringing a written confession detailing everything he knew about his mother's crimes. He was facing charges as an accessory, but his cooperation with the investigation had earned him a plea deal. He would serve 2 years in minimum security prison, and he would have to live with the knowledge that he had helped a serial killer for most of his adult life. "I'm sorry, Victoria," he said as he prepared to leave. "I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I never wanted anyone to get hurt. I just wanted to protect my mother, and I was too blind to see what she really was." I looked at this man who had been my stepbrother for over a decade, who had made my life miserable with his casual cruelty, who had helped a murderer steal my inheritance. "I forgive you, Marcus. But I can't forget what you did. We'll never be family." Patricia's trial was a media sensation. The prosecution painted a picture of a calculating serial killer who had murdered 4 people and stolen millions of dollars over 20 years. The defense tried to argue that she was a victim herself, driven to desperate acts by financial pressure and abusive relationships. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the judge read the sentence, Patricia turned to look at me one final time. Her eyes were cold, empty, completely devoid of remorse. She had destroyed so many lives, and she felt nothing. In that moment, I realized that I had been living with a monster, and I was grateful to be free. The estate was settled within 6 months. Patricia's assets were seized to pay restitution to the families of her victims. Marcus forfeited his inheritance as part of his plea agreement. My father recovered enough to resume control of his portion of the family fortune, and I finally received full access to my grandmother's trust. But the money didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that my father and I had found our way back to each other. We had survived Patricia's poisonous influence, and we were finally free to be a real family again. My grandmother's sacrifice had not been in vain. Justice had been served, and the Sterling family legacy would continue, built on truth instead of lies, love instead of murder. As I stood in my grandmother's garden 1 year later, watching my father tend to the roses she had planted decades ago, I felt her presence like a warm embrace. She had known the truth about Patricia, and she had died trying to protect the people she loved. Her courage had saved my life and my father's life, and her memory would always remind us that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to remain silent in the face of evil.